Hello everyone and welcome. We have some great news for Zelda Breath of the Wild 2 and its possible performance on the Nintendo Switch. Some upgrades it's getting. A full 1080p and 30 frames per second, maybe 60, might be possible. This is thanks to the recent release of Monolithsoft's Xenoblade Chronicles 3, which showed a great performance and visual boost from their previous Xenoblade Chronicles 2. If you are interested in an even more in-depth video on all of Breath of the Wild 2's visual improvements that we have found and examples of how Fidelity FX or a similar upsampling technique could help the game, with a side-by-side comparison of screenshots and gameplay, check out this video here. Some of you may be wondering, what does Xenoblade or Monolithsoft have to do with Zelda or Breath of the Wild 2? Actually, a lot. Monolithsoft has helped develop at least 4 Zelda games and now have their own official Zelda team. They have worked on Skyward Sword, A Link Between Worlds, Breath of the Wild, its DLCs, and are now helping on Breath of the Wild 2, possibly even an unannounced Zelda game, though that is just speculation based on rumors. Outside of Zelda and their own games, they have also helped on Super Smash Bros. Brawl, Animal Crossing New Leaf, Pikmin 3, Splatoon, Animal Crossing Happy Home Designer, Splatoon 2, Animal Crossing New Leaf, and based on their history, they likely are also helping on Splatoon 3, which also has a huge improvement in visual quality over Splatoon 2. How much could Breath of the Wild sequel be improved from the original though? Quite a bit, actually. If we take a look at Xenoblade Chronicles 3, not only does it have improved resolution and frame rate, but it achieves this while also running what should technically be a much more demanding game with an overworld well over 5 times as large, a much better depth of field to see things further away, improved character models, more detailed environments, weapons, and just everything in the game seems to have improved lighting, details, and textures. Technically, improving character models, adding better textures, increasing the draw distance, and all of the other improvements this game has, should mean the game would be running at an even lower frame rate and resolution, but the resolution is more than doubled at times. Xenoblade Chronicles 2 was a great game, but was also famous for being one of the worst performing games on the Switch because of how detailed it was in pushing the Switch to its limits. From Digital Foundry, who did a very in-depth look at both games, using very blurry anti-aliasing, it would run at 720p and 30 frames per second, but would have a lot of areas that dip down to 540p and 20 frames per second. Sometimes looking like it runs even worse, due to its poor upscaling or anti-aliasing. In handheld mode, the resolution is around 540p down to 360p, and still has frame drops. The game also featured heavy pop-in where the draw distance wasn't that long, so while running through the field, you would need to be relatively close before grass, trees, and other objects would show on screen. Chronicles 2 would then take this lower resolution and essentially stretch it out to display in 1080p or 720p, making it a game with one of the lowest resolutions and frame rates, making it one of the blurriest games on the Nintendo Switch. Thankfully, Monolithsoft has improved and upgraded all of this with Xenoblade Chronicles 3, while still reaching better performance. Chronicles 3 will still sometimes hit that lower resolution, but runs at the higher 720p most of the time. On top of this, Monolithsoft has implemented a new upsampling technique. Instead of basically stretching the image to fill the screen, it actually fills in the pixels that aren't there using data from previous scenes to judge what is meant to be there, making the game look closer to what a native 1080p game would be, and up to 4 times better than Chronicle 2's 540p, and twice as good as its 720p. This isn't as great as if the game natively ran at full 1080p or used something like Nvidia's new DLSS, but is still a huge improvement, clearly. The handheld mode's resolution and frame rate see an even better boost in quality, looking like a normal 720p game most of the time, and keeping that higher frame rate. As great as this is for Xenoblade Chronicles 3, if Nintendo and Monolithsoft decide to use this for Breath of the Wild 2, it would be an even bigger improvement. Instead of barely reaching 720p most of the time, and dipping to around 540p a lot, like Chronicles 2, Breath of the Wild 1 is set at 900p, and only dips down to above 720p. So it wouldn't even need to use this new upsampling method as heavily, and could easily reach the full 1080p and constant 30 frames per second. But I would love to see Nintendo go the extra mile and use it for 1080p and 60 frames. Similar to Xenoblade 3's improved depth of field, better character models, lighting, and everything, we already see Breath of the Wild 2 having these improvements in these areas as well, which has made some people worry that it may be at a cost of performance, and the sequel ends up running at a lower resolution to achieve these upgrades. But we have to remember, Breath of the Wild 1 was primarily developed for the Wii U, and quickly ported to Switch. Nintendo themselves have even mentioned not wanting to have a big difference between the two, so that Wii U and Switch players have a similar experience. However, Breath of the Wild 2 has been developed specifically for the Nintendo Switch. Let's not forget, a new patent was also recently discovered from Nintendo for a similar artificial upsampling technique that we haven't even seen in a game yet, and many believe it to be even better than the upsampling used in Switch Sports with Fidelity FX. Otherwise, they would seemingly just keep using it, instead of taking the time to develop their own, which was most likely because they wanted to develop it specifically for the Switch. If you are interested in an even more in-depth video on all of Breath of the Wild 2's visual improvements that we have found, and examples of how Fidelity FX or a similar upsampling technique could help the game, with a side-by-side comparison of screenshots and gameplay, check out this video here. If you have any questions you would like for us to answer, or news and topics you would like us to discuss in a video or our podcast, you can leave them below in the comments, and we will get to as many as we can. And if you are a Patreon supporter, we will guarantee that your answer is moved to the top of the list to be answered or discussed first on our podcast, which happens every Thursday at 9:30 Eastern or 6:30 Pacific. Thank you to Riker1 someone whose name is only donated to hear Jesse speak my name and then didn't give me his name, Gene Pinna, Disappointment, Joseph Stewart, ZAIN JIWANI, SOBERX, Mr. Monocled Metroid, David Guthman, Zoe M, Natsu, Jesse Wood, 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏, Ashton, Justin Clark, Candy, Chad Costin, Blargnar, Monica Spath, Lovable Christie, and Gus Calvo. I apologize if I got some of your names wrong. Please comment below, or you can message me directly to correct how I pronounced your name. Thank you all for your support, and I hope these videos keep entertaining everyone.